Hi, I'm Lorena, and this was supposed to be the happiest night of my life. My father's will had just named me sole heir, $74 million. But while my family clinked glasses and laughed like they hadn't spent years trying to erase me, I caught my husband, leaning over my wine glass, with a smile I'll never forget. So I made a choice. I swapped glasses with his sister, the same woman who spent half her life scheming to take what was mine. A few minutes later, she started choking. Right there, in front of everyone. Was it justice? Or was it something darker? Before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it? Drop a comment below, because what you're about to hear might just change the way you look at family forever. The air inside the estate felt like it hadn't moved in years, heavy with old perfume, furniture wax, and quiet judgment. I could hear the slow clink of champagne glasses and polite chuckles from the hallway as I stood just outside the drawing room, smoothing the creases from my navy silk dress for the third time. My hands wouldn't stay still. The double doors loomed like a gate to a war zone dressed in Southern charm. And behind them, my family sat, smiling, drinking, and pretending we hadn't all silently agreed to tear each other apart the moment Daddy died. I stepped inside, heels tapping against the glossy cherrywood floors. That sound, sharp, too loud, bounced off the walls where generations of grim portraits watched from their gold frames. Men with square jaws and women in pearls who never smiled with their eyes. I grew up under those eyes. Everyone was already seated. My mother, stiff-backed in her favorite green suit. Cousins I hadn't seen in years, perched on the edge of the velvet chairs like they didn't want to touch anything. And then there was Delphine, my sister-in-law, lounging in her seat like she owned the place. That smile she wore was sugar-glazed poison. She caught my eye and raised her glass as if to say, "Good luck, darling. You'll need it." Byron, my husband, sat beside her. Not beside me, beside her. I took my seat slowly, folding Daddy's old handkerchief into my palm. White cotton, monogrammed corner. He used to wave it dramatically whenever he sneezed, like a stage actor. I held onto it like armor. The attorney cleared his throat and stood at the head of the room, shuffling papers. The room quieted, anticipation pressing down on everyone like Texas heat in August. I had prepared for this moment, rehearsed it in my head for weeks. I was the youngest, yes, the one they all used to call the baby, like it was some kind of disqualification. But I'd been there at the end, at the hospital, alone with him when he couldn't speak, just squeezed my hand. He had told me, even without words, that this, today, was mine. The lawyer looked down at the document. "To my beloved children and their families," he began. "I leave behind a legacy not only of property and finance, but of tradition and honor." I straightened in my seat. My heart beat so loud I thought everyone could hear it. "And to my daughter, Lauren—" Wait, what? There was a pause, brief but sharp, like a paper cut. "Lauren will inherit—" "Excuse me," I said, sitting forward. "Did you mean Lorena?" Whispers rose like steam. I heard someone in the back chuckle. The lawyer blinked, flustered. "It says Lauren, ma'am." I sat back slowly. Delphine smirked, eyes twinkling like Christmas lights. Byron looked at the floor. That couldn't be right. Daddy never called me Lauren. Ever. Not once. That wasn't a typo. That was sabotage. I felt my throat close up, but I didn't cry. Not here. Not in front of them. I clenched the handkerchief so hard I thought the stitching might rip. The lawyer tried to recover. "Regardless of the name discrepancy, the full legal name of the heir matches the details on file." He looked toward the technician near the fireplace, who was adjusting some old-fashioned AV equipment. A spotlight clicked on with a low whir and lit up the center of the room. Everyone turned. "And now, the official announcement of the heir to the primary estate and holdings." A video played. Daddy's voice, pre-recorded. I, Gerald Whitmore, leave the majority of my estate, $74 million in assets, real estate, and investments, to my daughter, Lauren Marie Whitmore. Applause. Real, actual applause. Delphine leaned forward in her chair like she was basking in stage light. People looked around in confusion, unsure whether to clap or stay quiet. I sat frozen. That wasn't my name. That was never my name. But Delphine's middle name? Marie. And she had been using my family name on certain business filings. I'd seen it before, once, in passing, and brushed it off. The blood left my face. She deserves it, someone whispered behind me. She's always been the real backbone of the family, not that youngest one. I stared at the spotlight and tried to disappear into the floor. Every cell in my body buzzed with shame, rage, and something colder than either, betrayal. Delphine stood up as if to curtsy. I didn't move. Not yet. I wasn't going to cause a scene. Not yet. Because something told me this wasn't a mistake. And if it wasn't a mistake, it was a warning. A soft chime echoed through the hall, signaling the transition from formality to dinner. The crowd began to shift, heels clicking against the hardwood as servers moved quietly around the edges, opening doors to the adjacent banquet room. I stood slowly, smoothing my dress again more out of habit than vanity. My legs felt heavy, like I'd been walking through water since the will was read. Someone touched my elbow, one of the estate staff, gesturing with a polite nod to follow. We moved through the corridor and into the dining hall. The room was magnificent, of course. Long crystal chandeliers floated above a walnut table that could have stretched half a city block. White roses in gold vases, silverware polished to a mirror shine, and place cards in delicate calligraphy. Nothing here was accidental. Where you sat at this table said everything. I scanned for my name. My breath caught when I spotted Delphine seated close to the head of the table, right beside the lawyer who'd butchered my name. Byron sat on her other side, already pouring her wine, as if this were their anniversary dinner. I walked along the table slowly, eyes trailing over the names. Aunt Ruth, Uncle Don, cousins, family friends, people I hadn't seen in 10 years, but who still got better seats than I did. Then I saw it. My place card, far end of the table. 3 chairs down from the swinging door to the restroom, the seat closest to the server station. It wasn't just a slight. It was a message. I stood there a second longer than I should have, heart pounding so loud I was afraid someone might hear it over the clatter of silver trays. I could smell cleaning supplies wafting from the restroom every time the door swung open, a place for the forgotten, the dismissed, the nobody. I sat down quietly, folding Daddy's handkerchief again. This time I didn't cry. I refused to give them that. Across the table, a cousin gave me a small, sheepish smile. I returned it with a blink and looked away. I didn't need pity, not from people who'd watched this kind of thing happen my whole life and only ever offered half-hearted condolences at best. Delphine laughed from the center of the room. Loud, too loud. That artificial kind of laugh you use when you want people to look. And they did. She leaned toward Byron and said something that made him grin, but I couldn't hear what. I didn't want to. I tried to eat, but the food had no taste. I just moved things around the plate. My thoughts wouldn't settle. I kept thinking about the will, about that name. Lauren. She'd pulled something. I didn't know how yet, but my gut was screaming. Halfway through dinner, Delphine rose, glass in hand. She didn't tap it for silence. She didn't have to. Her voice floated out across the room like syrup over pancakes. To family, she began, smiling warmly. To those who've stood by through every late night, every hard decision, and especially to those who have the grace to smile when others suddenly find themselves unexpectedly blessed. A few chuckles broke out, the kind of laughter that's more about the permission to laugh than the joke itself. Delphine wasn't done. Here's to those who stumble into fortune, even when the rest of us did the real work. Cheers. The room was still. Some guests raised eyebrows. One older uncle coughed and stared down into his soup. A younger cousin looked at me, then quickly away. No one said anything. I didn't flinch. I just lifted my glass to my lips, pretending I hadn't heard a thing. But inside, every word landed like a slap. My fingers curled around the stem of the glass tighter than I meant to. I put it down before I cracked it. I'd spent a lifetime being the quiet one, the polite one, the good daughter who stayed out of fights and thanked people who didn't deserve it. But sitting there next to the damn bathroom, listening to that smug toast, I felt something in me shift. No more silence, no more swallowing it down. Not this time. The warmth in the room didn't reach me. It clung to the others, their laughter, their wine-flushed cheeks, their easy smiles that didn't feel earned. I stared at my plate, barely touched, while the noise faded to a soft hum behind my ears. And then it hit me, not like a memory, but like a voice rising from somewhere deeper than thought. I left you this because you never asked for anything, and because you always gave more than anyone noticed. Daddy had said that to me the last time we spoke, really spoke, before the machines and the tubes made conversation impossible. It was after visiting hours at the hospital, back when he still had the strength to wave the nurses out of the room. The TV flickered low in the corner, and the smell of antiseptic hung thick in the air. I sat on the edge of his bed, holding his hand with both of mine. He looked tired but clear, like something he'd been holding on to was finally ready to be let go. He had reached over to the nightstand, slid open the drawer, and pulled out an envelope. It was pale yellow, thick stock. My name written across it in his handwriting, shaky but unmistakably his. I could see his effort in every letter. The L was lopsided, the A nearly a smudge. But it was my name, no misspelling, no mistake. "Don't open it yet," he said quietly. "You'll know when." I hadn't asked what was inside. I just nodded, swallowed the lump in my throat, and tucked it into my purse like it was made of glass. Now, sitting in the estate's banquet hall, near the scent of lemon cleaner and the steady clang of dishes being cleared, I remembered how that envelope had trembled in my hands. It matched the tremble in his voice when he said, "Don't let them talk you out of what you know is right. They'll try." He wasn't talking about strangers. He was talking about them. This room. This exact table. And maybe he knew they'd twist things the second he was gone. I blinked slowly and sat up straighter. The walls around me came back into focus. Byron's voice carried down the table, laughing louder than usual. Probably at some joke he didn't even understand. Delphine's laugh followed, light, calculated, rehearsed. She was leaning in toward one of my father's oldest friends, her hand grazing his arm like she belonged in every room. I looked down at my wine glass. The red liquid caught the light and glowed like garnet. I ran a finger along the rim and whispered, so softly I wasn't even sure I said it out loud. "He saw me, and I'll make sure they do too." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a promise. It was a shift, like a stone dropped into water. Because for the first time that evening, I wasn't just enduring the night. I was thinking. I was remembering things I'd tucked away for too long. Daddy always said I watched more than I spoke, that I caught things others missed. And right now I was noticing details that weren't accidental. The way Delphine had timed her toast right after the dessert plates were cleared. The way Byron had pretended not to see me the whole night, but had quietly pulled out Delphine's chair when she arrived. Even the seating chart. It wasn't the staff who arranged that. No, this was orchestrated, planned, and that made it worse. I reached into my clutch under the table and pulled out the folded envelope. I didn't open it, just held it between my fingers, letting its weight settle something inside me. I didn't need to read it again. I remembered every word. You're the one who stayed. You're the one who listened when I had nothing left but stories. That matters, baby girl. It always did. I tucked the envelope back away and exhaled slowly. No more shaking hands. No more quiet acceptance. I would not let my father's last words drown beneath Delphine's champagne toast. The clink of cutlery tapping fine china filled the space between us like a curtain. I tried to focus on my breathing, slow, steady, but every sound around me echoed too loud, too sharp. The scent of rosemary lamb drifted up from the plate in front of me, untouched. I hadn't taken a single bite since I sat down. Across the table, Delphine was glowing under the amber chandelier light, basking in laughter that wasn't hers, but she wore it like a crown. Then came the voice, a smooth baritone, unfamiliar and distant enough to be cruel. Funny, isn't it? The quiet ones, the air. She was always just background, right? The sentence came not from family, but from someone just adjacent. A man in his 60s, silver hair, crisp gray suit, seated beside Byron. I remembered him vaguely from years ago, one of my father's old business acquaintances, the kind who shook hands too long and always talked about legacy as if he had invented the word. I didn't look at him. I stared at my plate, jaw locked. His words weren't a slip. They landed with purpose, designed to draw blood without raising a hand. And the silence that followed? That was the real cut. No one corrected him. Not Byron. He just chuckled under his breath and reached for his wine. Not my sister Camille, who had always said she wanted to protect me. Not even my brother, who used to slip me gum under the pew during Sunday service when I looked like I might cry. I looked up slowly. My eyes scanned the table. They were all still eating. A cousin shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable, but said nothing. Another offered me a weak smile, as if that counted for anything. Byron kept his focus on his plate, methodically slicing his steak. And Delphine? She was already raising her glass again. You know, the man added with a dry grin, your father never did mention her much when we talked shop. Guess we all assumed she wasn't really in the picture. There it was. That phrase, not in the picture. I had heard it before, from Delphine. Just a few months back, during a family brunch, she had let it slip while talking to Byron's mother. She's sweet, but let's be honest, she'd said, hand fluttering to her pearls. Lorena's never really been in the picture when it comes to family decisions. That same phrase, now repeated by a man who should have never had that detail in his mouth, let alone delivered it like a joke. I didn't move. Inside, though, something cracked. This wasn't just mockery. It was orchestration. Delphine had been whispering into ears beyond our walls. She hadn't just painted me small inside this house. She had exported the image, franchised it. I looked at her. She met my gaze across the table, unbothered. She tilted her head, lips curled at the corners like someone who had already won. And in that second, I understood everything. The misread name in the will, the humiliating seat, the toast. This wasn't chaos. It was design. My hand curled under the table, fingernails digging into my palm. Not enough to break skin, just enough to remind myself I was still here. I leaned back slightly, catching my reflection in the polished silver urn at the center of the table. I looked tired, yes, but I didn't look broken. Across from me, Byron finally looked up, caught my eye, and quickly looked away. Guilt? Maybe? Cowardice? Absolutely. The man who had once held my shaking hands under the stars during a storm now couldn't manage eye contact when I was being humiliated 2 chairs away. And Delphine? She let out a laugh. Not loud, but sharp. People just have a hard time adjusting to surprises, she said, her eyes still on me, especially when someone's rise feels unearned. I didn't speak, not yet, but something inside me rose, a small, hard promise. She would see. They all would, because I had been quiet. I had stayed in the background. I had swallowed every slight, every side-eye, every undermining comment, thinking silence was strength. But it was time they learned. Silence doesn't mean surrender. I don't recall asking to be in the picture, I said, my voice calm but sharp, slicing clean through the din of conversation. Every fork froze mid-air. Glasses hovered, half raised. A second passed, 2, and then all eyes turned toward me. I find it funny, I continued, folding my hands in my lap, how the ones who benefited the most from this family are the quickest to forget who laid the bricks they now stand on. A murmur stirred along the table like a slow wind picking up before a storm. Byron's brow furrowed slightly, but he didn't speak. Delphine's smile froze in place. I didn't blink. There's always someone in the background, isn't there? I said, voice steady. The one who remembers birthdays, smooths over awkward silences, makes the coffee before a big meeting. The one who doesn't ask for credit because she thinks doing the right thing should be enough. I paused long enough to let the quiet thicken. But that quiet doesn't mean I didn't see, or remember, or endure. Delphine placed her wine glass down a little too hard. The clink echoed. Lorena, she said, tone sing-song sweet, this evening has clearly been a lot for you. Maybe a bit of air would help. I turned my head slowly toward her, eyes locked. Be careful, Delphine, I said, the edges of my voice no longer soft. Push too far, and you'll regret underestimating me. She blinked, just once, and I saw it. A flicker, small, quick, but real. For the first time that night, she wasn't entirely certain. Then came Byron. He let out a soft chuckle, warm, measured, the kind that had once calmed me after nightmares. Oh, sweetheart, he said with practiced ease, you're always so passionate. But I think you've had a long day. This must all feel like a lot. He placed a hand gently on my shoulder. The gesture looked tender, but his fingers pressed, not comforting, but controlling. A quiet warning. She doesn't usually speak like this, he said to the table with a polished grin. She's just overwhelmed. You know how emotions can sneak up on us. Laughter, tight and unsure, bubbled from a few corners. My aunt let out a breathy sigh. My cousin shook her head and whispered something to her husband. The room began to shift back, the air pulling away from me like receding tide, as if Byron had swept in with a warm towel and wiped my fire clean off the tablecloth. But I stayed still. Inside, though, something had crystallized. Byron wasn't just standing by. He was part of it, part of the soft con, the polite dismissal, the she's just emotional narrative I'd seen deployed on too many women in this family, women who dared to speak plainly. This wasn't defense. This was containment. He looked at me again, his hand still resting on my shoulder, his smile too smooth. We all love you, babe, he said, softer now, meant just for me. Let's not turn this into something it's not. I nodded, but not in agreement, just to move him along, the way you might nod to a dog that's still barking even after the threat's gone. He removed his hand, finally. The moment passed, or at least everyone acted like it had. I picked up my napkin and dabbed at the corner of my mouth, though there was nothing there. Across the table, Delphine leaned into Byron and whispered something I didn't catch. They both laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly, just openly, as if nothing had happened. I reached for my glass, the wine now warm and sharp. I let it sit on my tongue a little too long before swallowing. No one else at that table knew it, but I had made a decision. No more measured silences, no more shrugging it off, no more letting charm paper over insult. They wanted a background character, but I had no intention of staying behind the curtain. Byron thought he was clever. He thought smiling through a lie would silence me. Thought a public display of control wrapped in charm would keep me quiet and obedient. But he hadn't been listening. Not really. And now, as the din of conversation picked up again, more forced than natural, I sat still, letting my eyes wander back to my wine glass. The red shimmered beneath the chandelier's soft glow. My fingers rested on the stem, but I didn't drink, because I knew. I'd seen it. Not minutes before, maybe longer, maybe earlier, time had warped a little since Delphine's toast and the slap of Byron's support. But I remembered the moment, clear as anything. His hand had hovered just a beat too long near my place setting. His smile was too polished, the kind that comes with rehearsals. That was when the tickle started in the back of my mind. And now I saw it. Just faint, but unmistakable, on the rim of my glass. A chalky ring where there shouldn't be one. I leaned ever so slightly toward Byron, who sat laughing with Delphine about some story from a summer years back. His hand rested lazily on his knife, like he hadn't tried to sabotage me just moments earlier. "I saw what you did," I whispered, so low only he could hear it. He didn't turn, didn't flinch, but the muscles in his jaw clenched for half a second before he recovered. He kept smiling. "Sweetheart," he said smoothly, raising his glass as if in toast to no one. "You're imagining things." That was his specialty, making me question what I knew until I stopped trusting my own memory. But this time, I wasn't guessing. I had seen it, felt it, knew it. And that was enough. I looked across the table. Delphine's glass was still in her hand, nearly full. She was watching Byron, too, her gaze lingering just a second too long. They were always in step, those two. Always sharing looks they thought I wouldn't catch. Maybe she knew. Maybe she didn't. Maybe she thought whatever was in that glass would never touch her because she was too close to the source. I reached out slowly, naturally, as if I were bored with my drink. I lifted my glass, turned it toward me for a moment, then set it down in front of Delphine, and with the same motion, pulled hers to my side. Simple, seamless. No one noticed, except Byron. He turned now, just his eyes, wide enough for one beat. I didn't look back. I just rested my fingers on the base of the glass that had been hers. If he spoke, if he tried to undo it, the illusion would shatter for everyone. He'd have to explain why it mattered which drink belonged to whom. So he stayed quiet. The conversation at the table moved along awkwardly. Someone mentioned the weather this week. Someone else brought up a charity event. But every word around me sounded muffled, like I was underwater. Time was stretching, thick and slow. Delphine brought her glass to her lips, laughing again at something I didn't catch. I watched her fingers wrap around the stem, delicate and careless. She tilted the glass. I wanted to stop her. I didn't. I didn't even blink. She sipped. A small one, just a taste. But it was enough. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. Not victory, not relief. Something colder, like handing over a burden I'd been carrying alone and realizing someone else now bore the weight. I didn't know what Byron had done. If it was something to make me sick, something to embarrass me, something to dull my senses so they could say I'd been drinking too much. I didn't know. but I knew it hadn't been harmless. Delphine set her glass down, licking her lips slightly. She said. This bottle's too warm. I stared at her, waiting. Byron sat straighter, eyes flicking between us, lips pressed tight. The guilt hadn't hit me yet. Not fully. What hit first was clarity. He didn't protect me. He didn't even hide what he'd done well. They'd both spent years building stories about me, passive, weak, invisible. They didn't think I had it in me to look them in the eye and make a move of my own. And now they were one sip too late to change that. Delphine's laughter cracked into a cough so sudden it stopped half the table mid-sentence. At first, no one moved. They looked at her the way people do when someone chokes a little on wine, awkwardly amused, ready to pretend it didn't happen. But then her expression shifted. Her hand shot to her chest, and the next cough came harsher, deeper. The sound of her glass hitting the floor, crystal shattering against marble, cut through everything. Someone gasped. I think it was Aunt Rosemary. Delphine stood, or tried to, but her knees buckled almost immediately. She reached out for something, anything, and grabbed hold of Byron's sleeve before slumping hard against the side of the table. Her lips parted, but no words came, only wheezing. The room, just moments ago humming with tension-laced chatter, collapsed into pure confusion. Chairs scraped, forks clinked onto plates. Byron yelled something incoherent as he reached for her. "Somebody call for help!" someone shouted. But no one moved. She was convulsing now, face pale, body twisting as her fingers clawed at the air. All the venom she'd carried in that voice, that smirk, that toasting glass, was gone. Stripped down to something terrifyingly human. I didn't move. People were standing now, crowding toward her, some trying to help, others paralyzed by the sight. I heard my cousin Jeff whisper, "Is she having a seizure?" And his wife say, "This isn't normal. This isn't just a reaction." And then Byron did it. He turned to me, eyes wide, hands trembling, and screamed, "Lorena!" The way he said my name, it wasn't panic, it was accusation. "She did this!" he shouted, pointing right at me. "She switched the glasses!" Gasps rippled through the room. I stayed seated. She was upset. Everyone saw it. She's been lashing out all night," he barked, his voice cracking now. "Delphine drank from Lorena's glass. She did it. She poisoned her." It was like the air got sucked out of the room. All eyes turned toward me, and I knew then. Knew it with the same certainty I'd felt when I saw Byron's hand near that glass. He was ready to burn everything to save himself. There was no hesitation in him, no pause, just cold instinct. Shift the blame, control the story, let her take the fall. I looked at him. Not a word escaped my lips. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. Because I could see now what I hadn't wanted to believe, not just who Byron had become, but who he always was. Even now, as Delphine writhed on the floor beside him, even now, he reached for a lie before he reached for her hand. The family stood frozen, unsure what to believe. Some glanced between me and Byron, waiting for someone to speak. Others edged toward the door, like they didn't want to be part of this anymore. Delphine let out a choking sound, a garbled cry between pain and panic. Still, I said nothing. I let the silence press in. Let it wrap itself around Byron's words until they started to sound like what they were. Desperation. Lies. Because if he wanted a war, he'd get one. But it wouldn't be loud and public. Not yet. No, I'd fight him the way I'd survived this family all these years. Quietly, sharply, with precision. And as the room spun with confusion, as Byron's voice grew more frantic, as Delphine's body curled on the floor like a collapsing monument to cruelty, I reached under the table, to the one piece of evidence Byron had forgotten. The air in the dining hall had thickened, heavy like a storm just seconds from breaking. Byron's voice still echoed in the silence, his desperate claim that I had poisoned Delphine. My name hung in the air like a stain no one wanted to touch. People stared, not just at me, but through me, as if trying to fit this version of me into the safe, quiet silhouette they'd always ignored. I recognized that look. I'd worn it myself for years, pretending not to see what was right in front of me. Delphine was still on the floor, weak, but conscious now. Her body had stopped writhing, but her chest rose and fell fast, shallow. Her eyes found mine, and even in her vulnerability I saw it. The same venom, just more diluted now. Byron stepped back, hands raised slightly, as if he were the one under attack. "Someone call the police," he said, a little too loudly. "She's dangerous. I stood, and the room quieted like it always did when something important was about to happen. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just looked around the room, locking eyes with those who'd known me my whole life and still never really seen me. "If any of you still believe him," I said, "then you deserve the lies you live in." A few people flinched. Byron opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. "No," I said. "You wanted a show? Let's have one." I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered for just a moment before I tapped the screen. Byron's voice filled the room, crisp and unmistakable. "Just slip it in her drink. No one will ever suspect." A sharp gasp broke the stillness. Then another. "She's too naive, too soft. Always has been." The room spun, but not from me. It spun around him now. Faces turned. Whispers erupted. Even Delphine stirred, trying to push herself up on an elbow to hear better. Byron's face went bloodless. "That's fake," he barked. "She edited that. She's trying to frame me." He lunged toward me. It wasn't graceful. It was panic in motion. He went for the phone, not me. But I stepped back calmly, out of reach. Several guests grabbed him, pulling him back as he flailed. "Let go of me," he shouted. "She's crazy, don't you see that?" But no one looked at me like I was crazy. Not anymore. I tucked the phone away, voice steady. "Funny how desperate you sound when the truth is finally louder than you." Byron twisted against the hands holding him, trying to regain his composure, but the charm was gone. It had cracked wide open, and what lay beneath it was raw and ugly, and exactly who he was. Delphine managed to speak, her voice hoarse. You recorded us?" "I recorded him," I corrected. "You just happened to be in the room." A heavy silence followed. It wasn't just shock. It was a reshuffling. People were rearranging what they thought they knew. Faces that had once dismissed me were now turning toward me, unsure, hesitant, but curious. "I wonder," I continued, pacing slightly now, my heels clicking against the floor. "How many of you would have protected him anyway, even if I hadn't had proof?" No one answered, but the way they avoided my eyes said enough. "I've lived my whole life being quiet so others could be comfortable," I said, voice calm but cutting. "I played the role. I held my tongue. I let him—" I glanced at Byron, who now stood breathing heavily, face contorted with rage. "Turn me into a ghost in my own life." I turned back to the room. But ghosts see everything, and they remember. Byron finally broke from the arms holding him and staggered toward the fireplace, away from the crowd, seething. I noticed his hands twitching slightly. He wasn't done, but neither was I. "You're not going to get away with this," he muttered, low, as if it was still a threat. I stepped closer to him, just enough so only he could hear me clearly. "You already lost," I said. "You just haven't accepted it yet." His nostrils flared. His eyes darted toward the door, and then, like a final curtain being drawn, my uncle, who hadn't said a word all evening, stepped forward and cleared his throat. "Call the police," he said flatly, not looking at Byron. "Let them sort it out." No one objected. The power in the room had shifted. It wasn't loud, it wasn't chaotic. It was quiet, complete, and irreversible. And in that silence, I knew the battle was over, but the war for my freedom had just begun. They didn't speak as the officers stepped forward, not the guests, not the family, not even Byron. The clink of cuffs being locked around his wrists echoed louder than anything said that night. For all the noise he'd made, years of controlling tones and veiled jabs, he now had no voice left that anyone cared to hear. The officer closest to him asked calmly, "You understand your rights?" Byron nodded but didn't look up. His face had lost that smug polish he always wore in public. Now it was just pale skin and panic held behind clenched teeth. He glanced toward me only once. A short, stinging look, rage mixed with disbelief, as if he still couldn't grasp that I had outmaneuvered him. And maybe that was the part that cut deepest for him. That I, the quiet one, had done what none of them ever expected. As they led him out the side entrance, the rest of the room remained suspended in stunned breath. Only after the door clicked shut did the energy shift. Some guests stood, fumbling for coats and keys, murmuring excuses as they filed out. "I had no idea," one whispered to her husband. "We shouldn't have stayed this long," another muttered under her breath. A few tried to offer me sympathetic glances. None of them held steady eye contact. Fine. Let them leave. Let the air clear. The once elegant dining hall looked like the ruins of a celebration that turned on itself. Shattered glass sparkled under candlelight. The tablecloth was stained with wine, and the centerpiece, those ridiculous white roses, had toppled during Byron's outburst, petals scattered like fallen confetti. Delphine sat at the far end of the table, upright now but limp. Her hands gripped the edge of her chair, knuckles pale. She wasn't speaking, not to anyone. Her color hadn't fully returned, and her breathing remained shallow but even. I walked slowly toward her, each step echoing slightly in the cavernous space. She didn't lift her head until I was nearly beside her. When she finally looked up, her eyes weren't defiant or hateful like before. They were empty, like she'd been hollowed out in a single night. She opened her mouth slightly, as if to speak, but no words followed. I waited, not to hear her apology, I knew one would never come, but simply to see if she could still summon the same fire she once used to burn me. She couldn't. I leaned in, just close enough so only she could hear. "Silence suits you," I said softly. "You used to wield your words like daggers, but now it seems they've all turned inward." Delphine blinked, once, slowly. Her shoulders fell slightly. She looked older now, smaller. I stood again and walked away without waiting for a response. The rest of the family had stayed near the back of the room. They watched, like they always did, half curious, half afraid of doing anything that might make them targets of the next spectacle. A few cousins avoided my gaze. One of my aunts gave me a stiff nod, like she'd finally acknowledged my existence but didn't know what to do with it. The truth was, they'd never stood for me, not even once. But now that the tides had turned, their silence screamed just as loudly as Byron's accusations had. I didn't want their validation anymore. I stepped out into the hallway and crossed toward the foyer. The night air had cooled, brushing against my skin as I reached for the door and pushed it open. The estate grounds were quiet now. A few porch lanterns flickered. Somewhere out past the trees, crickets chirped like nothing had happened. I walked out onto the front steps and let the door close behind me. The air smelled different out here, clean, unfiltered, like I was finally breathing for myself. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just stood there, feeling the earth beneath my feet and the weight of something I hadn't carried before. Control. Real, unshakable control. Not the kind given by inheritance papers or family names, but the kind you earn when you stop waiting to be saved. I thought about everything that led to this moment, the years of silence, the rooms I'd been invisible in, the voices that always drowned out mine. Winning didn't erase all of that. It didn't undo the nights I sat at the edge of my bed, wondering who I had become trying to make a marriage work that was never meant to be. It didn't fill the holes left by friendships eroded by jealousy or obligation, but it was something, a beginning. Inside the house, voices stirred again. Someone moved furniture. The night wasn't over for them. They would have to sit with their guilt, their doubt, their uncomfortable truth that they let it all happen, but not me, not anymore. I walked down the stone path, each step lighter than the one before. The moon hung high above the treetops, watching without judgment. And though the inheritance was mine, what I truly claimed that night was something far greater. My voice,